charged a man in connection with the death of Linda Woods in her Kaikohe home last week. The 52-year-old has been taken into custody after officers searched a nearby property earlier today. Lucy Sia reports.
The police have charged the man with manslaughter, burglary and aggravated assault, and he will appear in Kaikohe District Court tomorrow. Linda Woods, 71, died on Thursday night after being injured during a struggle when a person broke into her Taraire Street property. The offender fled barefoot without his shorts following what police said earlier this week was probably a sexually motivated burglary. Detective Inspector Rhys Johnston of Northland CIB says the police are not seeking anyone else in relation to this matter. He says the death was a tragedy and has been felt deeply throughout the community.
The Health Minister says new vape restrictions strike a balance to keep them out of children's hands while helping adults quit smoking. Measures announced this afternoon include cracking down on disposable vapes and stopping new vape shops being allowed to open near schools or marae. Aisha Verrill says other changes include restrictions on how flavours can be described on packaging.
For example, a strawberry donut might be replaced with berry, so more generic names like that restrict the ability to develop a brand that is particularly appealing to young people.
Aisha Verrill says the changes will have a big impact on the number of young people vaping. The Cabinet Office reminded Michael Wood about the need to get rid of his shares in Auckland Airport around half a dozen times. Mr Wood has been stood down as Transport Minister after initially failing to declare the shares and then failing to divest them. The Prime Minister reminded all of his ministers of the rules around managing actual and perceived conflicts of interest earlier this year, during the saga which led to Stuart Nash's sacking. Chris Hipkins says he's frustrated Michael Wood didn't deal with the matter before now.
I did that actually earlier in the year. But when this issue arose the first time, I am disappointed that clearly has not been actioned at the time.
Chris Hipkins says as Transport Minister there was a perception of a conflict of interest by owning the shares, and Michael Wood should have dealt with that better. 5 people have been arrested after a massive group of riders tore through Auckland on dirt bikes. Police targeted an illegal dirt bike ride involving dozens of bikes over the long weekend. Felix Walton reports.
Police say there were up to 50 dirt bikes in the Manukau Memorial Gardens on Sunday, doing burnouts and disrupting the public. 2 riders crashed while they were fleeing from police and were taken to hospital with moderate injuries. Police say neither of them were wearing safety equipment. Another rider was pursued by the Eagle helicopter and found to be a member of the Killer Bees gang. 2 other riders were also arrested, one of whom was involved in a previous dirt bike run connected to the King Cobras gang.
And for a second night running, Russia's defence ministry is claiming to have thwarted a major offensive by Ukrainian forces in the occupied eastern region of Donetsk. It says its forces have inflicted huge losses in personnel and equipment. Ukraine didn't comment on this, but says its air defence systems are repelling Russian attacks in the Kyiv region. To sport, and newly appointed Crusaders coach Rob Penny says if he can't continue delivering Super Rugby success, he'll step down from the job when his 2-year contract expires. Penny will take over from Scott Robertson when he moves to the All Blacks after the World Cup. The Crusaders, who have a home quarter-final against the Fijian Drua on Saturday night, have won the last 4 Super Rugby titles, and Penny knows that means pressure.
There's no doubt that the expectation will remain, so it should. And that's one of the wonderful things about the history around the Crusaders. You know, the challenge is going to be to replicate that, and that involves, obviously, success.
Interim All Whites head coach Darren Baisley wants New Zealand football to make a permanent appointment sooner rather than later. Danny Hay left the job in October, and since then Baisley has been in charge on a temporary basis. He's just returned from the Under-20 World Cup in Argentina and is about to take the senior side to Europe for games against Sweden and Qatar.
It's quite unsettling for myself and the family, not knowing what's going to happen around the corner, but I'm pretty positive and optimistic person, and to be honest, it's a great job. It's a great position that I've been given, and I'm enjoying it.
And Moeen Ali is considering an approach from England to come out of Test cricket retirement to play in the Ashes as a replacement for the injured spinner Jack Leach. The first Test is in Birmingham starting on Friday week. That's the news.
The judge criticises a Kiwi witness in the Ben Roberts-Smith case.
It's
clear from the judgment that he considered person 35 an unreliable witness, that his testimony on occasion was at best far from honest, far from frank, and it was that person 35 directly lied on oath.
Atrocities detailed.
With respect to the raid on Darwan, where the man was kicked off the cliff and executed, he says person 35, that is, he gave evidence which was untrue.
And accusations of collusion.
He said he'd reached the conclusion that person 35 had colluded with Robert Smith to put forward a false account of what happened.
Bringing you the full story, Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
And we're funded through New Zealand On Air. You're with Lisa Owen next on Checkpoint. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Wednesday. For Northland, Auckland and Coromandel, occasional rain with thunderstorms possible in the east this afternoon. Rain clearing this evening. Fine tomorrow, apart from a few showers about Northland and Coromandel. For the Bay of Plenty, increasing fine spells. From Waikato to the Kapiti coast, including the central high country, partly cloudy today. Mainly fine tomorrow, apart from cloudy periods south of Taranaki. Gisborne to Wairarapa and also Wellington, also coastal Marlborough and North Canterbury, often cloudy with showers. Fine breaks developing in Wellington tomorrow afternoon. For the remainder of the South Island, mainly fine with morning frosts. A few areas of morning fog or low cloud, and for Kaikohe, Chatham Islands, mostly cloudy, isolated showers. It's 6 minutes past 5. I'll have traffic news and headlines for you at around 20 past 5.
Nā mihi iwi, tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai, ki Checkpoint te tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Inadequate. That's the PM's verdict on Michael Wood's explanation for holding on to his Auckland airport shares, despite being told several times to ditch them. But Chris Hipkins is standing by his man. Mr Wood has been temporarily stood down as Transport Minister for failing to properly disclose shares in the Super Cities airport. It's now come to light he was reminded to do so by the Cabinet Office about half a dozen times. Here's our political reporter, Katie Scotcher.
Senior Minister Michael Wood in big trouble over his shares in Auckland Airport.
I made some mistakes here. I got something wrong. That has created a distraction.
Mr Wood purchased just over 1,500 of them, currently worth about $13,000 when he was a teenager. He told the Cabinet Office about those shares when he became Transport Minister 30-odd years later in 2020. But he failed to declare them in the public register of MPs' assets. He says that's because he thought they'd been sold.
I had instructed the person who deals with these things for me to effectively get rid of those shares. I thought that had happened.
Mr Wood realised that hadn't happened last year and started declaring the shares publicly. He says he also restarted the process of selling them, but that didn't get very far.
I needed information back from the share register. That didn't arrive, I think, because they had an old email address. And in the reality of the fairly busy life that I have, I didn't get back to it.
So, as of right now, Mr Wood still has shares in Auckland Airport. National's Paul Goldsmith says it's a glaring conflict of interest.
If you're a minister responsible for a sector that has an impact on the value of shares, you shouldn't own those shares, and then you should manage those conflicts carefully.
Prime Minister Chris Hipkins sat down with Mr Wood for a please explain this morning. The Under Fire Minister didn't offer his resignation during the meeting, but was temporarily stood down from his beloved transport portfolio. The Prime Minister says one of his main frustrations is that Mr Wood repeatedly told the Cabinet Office his shares would be sold.
I think it is an unacceptable situation for him to find himself in, and therefore I think the best thing to do is stand him down while he does resolve those matters.
The Prime Minister has left the door open for Mr Wood to regain the portfolio, but first he's instructed Mr Wood to sell his shares and correct the public register of MPs' assets.
So I have to take my medicine around this, and I have to put these two things right, and I'll do that.
Mr Hipkins first learned of Mr Wood's shares in Auckland Airport last night, 4 days after his office was told.
I've expressed some dissatisfaction with them about the amount of time that it took, but my office was informed, therefore I accept responsibility for the fact that my office was told on Friday.
National leader Christopher Luxon says the saga shows Mr Hipkins is a weak Prime Minister.
Chris Hipkins has a problem just not on managing his team. He's not a good leader at actually getting it gripped up and actually getting his executive team focused on what they should be focused on.
National thinks Mr Wood should be stripped of his Auckland portfolio too. But Mr Hipkins says that's not happening.
The Minister for Auckland Issues is primarily about facilitating work across a number of other portfolios, where the responsibility for that, of course, still rests with the primary portfolio minister.
And Mr Hipkins is describing this saga as an unhelpful distraction. It raises further questions about his minister's credibility. Later this week, Education Minister Jan Tinetti will be questioned by a powerful group of MPs over whether or not she deliberately misled Parliament. Now, a second minister is under pressure for failing to follow rules meant to hold the powerful to account.
And that was Katie Scotcher reporting. New vape stores will be banned from setting up within 300 metres of schools or marae under a government crackdown to stop young people getting hooked. From August, it will start phasing out cheaper disposable vapes that are arguably more appealing to younger users. All devices sold here will also need to have removable or replaceable batteries. And product descriptions will be restricted, meaning names like strawberry jelly donut and cotton candy are out. Health Minister Dr Aisha Verrall says the ban on new vape stores doesn't affect existing retailers or dairies selling vape products.
I'd just point out that the main, most impactful regulations here are really around what is able to be sold, and in particular, the disposable vapes are most of what is being sold in dairies at present.
Right. So does it go far enough? Because you're only talking about new stores. I mean, how many are there selling vape products within 300 metres of marae and schools currently?
Yeah, so these measures are part of a package, and I think in terms of the priority being stopping young people from taking up vaping, I think the most impactful part of that will be the changes in how products are allowed to be marketed in terms of the flavours, and also the ending the use of disposable vapes. I think in terms of the distance from a school, that's helpful, but the main impactful things I think will be the other measures.
So is the ban just window dressing?
It is part of a package of measures to address these issues, on top of the other regulations we have, for example, that all schools are vape-free, and that dairies, that no retail outlets are allowed to sell to under 18s.
Minister, are you able to give me a figure for how many vape sellers there are within 300 metres of schools and marae right now?
No, I am not.
Okay. How many vape stores are there in the country right now, specialist vape stores?
There's several. There's, if I recall correctly, 3,000.
And how much has that gone up over the last couple of years?
Well, it's gone up over a short period of time, hasn't it? But the key thing here is that there is a balance to be struck in this regulation between having a quick tool for adults who are smokers, which it's incredibly helpful for, but stopping young people from getting a habit that we don't want them to continue. And so the primary thing there is making sure that disposable vapes, which have really been what the youth market have taken up, and making sure they're not being marketed directly to young people with these flavours, those are the primary measures there.
There are multiple schools, and I'm talking about Auckland here, it's an area I know, where they have vape stores right near them. A number of Albany schools got several vape stores within 300 metres, or several sellers of vapes. I mean, how does that ban help them when the existing stores can just keep going on?
Yeah, so the advice I got looked at the different measures and compared them according to how impactful they are on the problem that we're trying to fix with it, which is youth vaping. And certainly the evidence was stronger for the other measures than this one, but we know that this one was particularly important to the communities as well, and that's why, after consultation, as well as the advice, we have kept that in there.
If you only really would like this to be used as a cessation aid, why not go to pharmacy purchasing for vapes?
Yeah, look, I think that those sorts of things are being considered in Australia, and pharmacies and prescription in Australia. Those are potential options, but we need the best regulations for New Zealand. And I do have a concern about at a time when we are implementing quite strong tobacco regulation about putting barriers between people being able to access vapes as a legit quit tool.
There
and
are thousands of pharmacies,
many of the populations that need to be able to quit also are those with the poorest access to healthcare. So there is a balance to be struck there.
So, Minister, do you not think there are enough pharmacies to supply the market?
Well, that's unlike the proposal of a prescription being required for vaping, which is the case in Australia. Would there be a regulatory barrier there before purchasing if it was just available at a pharmacy? So in terms of, if you're suggesting that would be an effective way of restricting vapes to young people, I'm just interested how that would be the case. That isn't the case in retail.
So, Minister, in terms of the new rules, your media material says introducing it in August, is that right?
There's two different timelines that's relevant. For the disposable vapes, the changes will be in 3 months' time. That will be after the passage of those regulations, and 6 months for that's for disposable vapes. Retailers will have 6 months to change their reusable vapes to compliant products after August.
So they're still allowed to sell their stock in the meantime, and actually the ban doesn't come in, until November with that lag time?
That's on disposable vapes,
yes.
That's correct. It's 3 months after August.
And that's the Health Minister, Dr. Aisha Verrill. Now, Checkpoint asked some vape users what they think of the changes.
I think that is going to have a big toll on a lot of people. I only use disposable vapes, so I'm not looking forward to this law change at all.
I think I might stop because I've never wanted to get a full non-disposable. So for me personally, I think I'll just stop with vapes. But yeah, because they are quite expensive as well.
I mean, it's okay, I guess. I don't really use disposables much, so.
I mean, I don't vape, but my friends that do normally use ones with batteries anyway, so.
I saw some people, they don't care about the price. Even the young people, the 20-ish, they don't care about the price.
I saw it coming because of Aussie. It's gonna make a lot of people sad, especially teenagers.
But it'll be good for them, I guess.
Yeah, it's a good, yeah. I just feel like people are gonna start selling them elsewhere and not buying them from stores, just like other stuff.
It will encourage people to just either go full on a non-disposable, which is a bit dodgy because then you just constantly have unlimited basically, or they just stop.
Some vape users and sellers there. It is 17 minutes after 5. Kia amo tonu mai. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. We're interested in your thoughts on that one. 2101 on text or tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. What do you make of the proposed changes to vaping laws? Police have arrested a man in connection to the killing of 71-year-old Linda Woods in her home in Kaikohe. Linda Woods died after an intruder entered her home on Thursday night and was discovered in a bedroom. Police say there was a struggle between the intruder and other members of the family. Our reporter Lucy Sia joins us now. Kia ora, Lucy, what more can you tell us?
Kia ora, Lisa. Well, today police have been searching a house on Taraire Street, the same road where Linda Woods lived, and this house was only about 5 houses down from the victim's home. And this afternoon police said they've arrested a 52-year-old male without incident, and he will be appearing in court tomorrow. So now he's facing charges of manslaughter, burglary and aggravated assault.
Okay, and what else have they said?
So they're thanking the community for their support during this investigation, particularly people who have come forward with information. And they said they're pleased to have brought a resolution for Linda's whānau.
You have been in town and talking to locals. What are they telling you?
Well, this morning, locals told us they were feeling pretty anxious and keen for an arrest to happen soon. There was also frustration that the offender wasn't coming forward and also some fears for safety among people living in the area, particularly young families. There will be relief among locals now that someone has been arrested, and we know that police are not seeking anyone else in relation to this incident.
Okay, so some relief from locals about the arrest, but do some people still have concerns?
Yeah, so some people are still concerned about home invasions and crime in general, and also we're hearing from shopkeepers and a community facility here about antisocial behaviour and verbal abuse that they're having to face on a day-to-day basis. But for Linda Woods whānau, hopefully some comfort for tonight that an arrest has been made.
Thank you for the update, Lucy. That's Lucy Sear, who's in Kaikohe, an arrest there in the home invasion case where 71-year-old Linda Woods was killed. It is 5:20 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Homai or whakaaro, we would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the program this evening. Let us know what you think of the proposed changes to the vape laws. The government's going to ban new vape stores within 300 metres of marae or schools. Also changing the descriptions that can be used to make them less appealing and getting rid of single-use vapes. And we'd love to hear from you about Michael Wood, who's lost his transport portfolio over really a shares shamble. Said he was selling them, didn't, and concerns about conflict of interest or the perception of one. 2101 on text, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or you can email us checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Let's go to the headlines now. Ko iwi anō tēnei.
A 52-year-old man is due in the Kaikohe District Court tomorrow, charged in connection with the death of 71-year-old Linda Woods in a home invasion. He was arrested after police searched a nearby Kaikohe property earlier today. The man's been charged with manslaughter, burglary and aggravated assault. The government's cracking down on youth vaping, banning new vape stores from setting up within 300 metres of schools or marae, ensuring all devices have removable or replaceable batteries, and outlawing names such as strawberry jelly donut. From August, cheaper disposable vapes that are arguably more appealing to younger users will be phased out. Health Minister Dr. Aisha Verrill told Checkpoint the ban on new vape stores won't affect the around 3,000 existing retailers or dairies selling vape products. Prime Minister Chris Hipkins says he's frustrated Michael Wood didn't deal with his Auckland airport shares until now. The Cabinet Office told the former Transport Minister about half a dozen times that he needed to get rid of the shares, worth around $13,000, which he's owned since he was a teenager. But he failed to do so, and today the Prime Minister stood him down temporarily to deal with the perceived conflict of interest. Mr Wood has apologised. The consumer watchdog says nothing much has changed since supermarkets were put on notice in March over misleading multi-buy deals, specials that aren't specials, and a mismatch between shelf and checkout prices. Consumer New Zealand wants the two main supermarket companies to be more collaborative to stop what it calls dodgy pricing tactics. And WorkSafe says controls to protect people from asbestos have not been applied properly at Auckland Central Fire Station. The safety regulator has issued an improvement notice against Fire and Emergency that also directs FENZ to review asbestos management plans at more than 300 other fire stations. Those are the headlines. Looking at traffic in Wellington, be aware on State Highway 1 there are roadworks closing lanes at Ngauranga Gorge and Vivian Street tonight. I will have more traffic news and headlines at about 20 to 6.
Ngā mihi, Evie. Next season's Super Rugby Pacific coaching puzzle is taking shape, with the Crusaders announcing Scott Robertson's replacement. Former Canterbury player Rob Penny has signed a 2-year contract to guide the side. Penny has overseas coaching experience that could have seen his services attract top dollar, but he says this role is about more than that.
My desire is to come back. It's certainly not remuneration. We didn't even talk about that right up until the end. You know, born and bred in the district, played 10 years for Canterbury. You know, my time away hasn't dented the passion and fire for the red and black.
And we're joined now by sports reporter Felicity Reid. Felicity, what's Rob Penny going to bring to Super Rugby Pacific?
Well, he's no stranger to Super Rugby. He was the coach of the Waratahs between 2019 and 2021. He was also assistant coach of the Crusaders when they won that title, won many titles, but in 2005 he was part of that there as well. And he's also taken Irish club Munster to a semi-final in the European Cup, and he's taken Canterbury to 4 NPC titles. So it's that kind of winning culture that the Crusaders were looking for when they were replacing Robertson. Obviously, Crusaders are very successful, so they wanted somebody quite aware of that. And Penny has been quite aware, and he does acknowledge that even if he isn't getting success straight away with the Crusaders, that he would step down from that role. He's coming to the Crusaders as well from work in Japan. He worked with the Shining Arcs in the club rugby competition over there. He's now actually currently in charge of the Japan under-20 side who are going to the World Championships. New Zealand has their team as well for that World Championships, and there's some Crusaders young guns in there as well. So he'll come into the Crusaders maybe having had a little bit of a close eye on some of these younger players or quite aware of what they are capable of. So it's another good sign for Canterbury and their academy program for somebody like that to be bringing that, I guess, trust in the youngsters and back into this competition as well. And by Rob Penny signing up with the Crusaders, and last week we got the All Black Sevens coach Clark Laidlaw taking over the Hurricanes. So we're just waiting on who's going to replace Leon MacDonald at the Blues for next season.
Let's move to footy. The All Whites will be missing some key players for this month's game in Europe. Why? Where are they? Darren Bazley, the interim coach, announced his squad today for games against Sweden and Qatar. So those 2 games are going to be played in Europe. But the major name missing was captain Chris Wood. He's out with a thigh injury, which he came to New Zealand earlier in the year for the 2 games against China for the All Whites' last 2 games. Didn't actually play in those games, and he had that injury at that time, kind of aggravated it during training with the All Whites here. It was an injury that ruled him out of the end of the EPL season. And basically saying that Wood is expected to be back for Nottingham Forest in their pre-season EPL games. And he wants to get him fit and firing for his club. And can sort of acknowledge the importance of him playing well and scoring goals at club level, the flow-on effect that'll have for New Zealand as well. So the major one, and especially for a New Zealand team that does need to be scoring goals, as we've entered into this World Cup qualifying phase as we look ahead for that next World Cup as well. Also missing are Sarpreet Singh and Ryan Thomas, 2 European-based players. Again, 2 players who have got kind of long-term injuries, ones that you would normally have included in the squad if they were fit, but Bazley said that these 2 aren't fit for international football, so he's missed them out. Coming back in, though, are Bill Tuiloma and Ben Waine, so 2 players who missed out on the China games in New Zealand. They're back, and they were only out due to club commitments, so they've got an opportunity to play for the All Whites this time. And with all of this toing and froing, it does mean that the All Whites are going to need a new captain, with Chris Wood not available for this. And it's looking potentially like Joe Bell would make his debut. He's a midfielder who'd make his debut as a captain for New Zealand. He's somebody who has been sort of, I guess, earmarked as somebody with leadership qualities and somebody who potential future. So I guess even Chris Wood missing these 2 quite important games for New Zealand, it gives an opportunity so some of these other players, and maybe as we look forward a little bit to the future as well, because we can't always rely on Chris Wood. Thank you, Felicity. That's our sports reporter, Felicity Reid. A 4-year parliament term, lower thresholds for parties to enter, and giving 16-year-olds the vote. All suggestions made by an independent panel charged with looking at how the electoral system could be fairer. There's been a mixed reaction to the proposals, as Ashley McCall reports.
The country's electoral system could be in line for a shake-up if suggestions from a panel of experts are accepted. The panel was commissioned to investigate whether our electoral laws are fit for purpose. Now it's released its draft recommendations, which includes a public referendum on stretching out the parliamentary term from 3 years to 4 years. Wellingtonians we spoke to are all for extending out that length.
It's good to have an extended time for new policies to bed in.
I think too much change between 2 parties just leads to choppy decision making and choppy implementation.
4 years will give them a more stable position.
There needs to be adequate time for them to be able to implement some of the ideas that they have.
But others in Christchurch and Taranaki aren't so sure about that.
We can kick them out sooner if they don't doing the job properly.
Stuff starts to go wrong at least.
Yeah,
there's an end in sight.
You don't have to wait another year for re-elections.
They should do it for local government as well. Going to do it for one, they need to do it for both.
They're all dumbasses anyway.
After 58 public meetings and more than 1,700 submissions, the panel says the suggested changes will make our electoral laws fairer, clearer and more accessible. It also suggests the party vote threshold to shrink from 5% down to 3.5%. The drop in percentage would make it easier for minor parties to get over the line and into government. Opinions from Te Whanganui Otara mixed.
I'm bloody scared of some of the very conservative parties. Some of them are just downright freakishly loony.
I think that we can have more representation as Māori if it gives us more bums on seats in there.
The possibility that we might get then a more diverse seats in the House.
We'd finish up with even more compromise, more arguments.
Other arguments in the political sphere have been centred around lowering the voting age to 16. Some Wellingtonians on board with that idea.
I have a family, two of whom meet that threshold, and they're both really thoughtful and concerned individuals who feel like that they would like to have their say.
The 16-year-olds these days are an awful lot smarter politically than we were at 16. They're much more sophisticated in the way they operate.
But those outside of the capital, not so much.
Don't think they've got their head screwed on properly at present point in time.
Oh, no, they're too young.
There are some 16-year-olds that would be brilliant and make great decisions and thoughtful decisions. There'll be others that will just be, I don't know what's happening.
The interim report will go through a second round of public consultation until the 17th of July before the panel gives the final copy to the government at the end of November.
Okay, we're keen for your feedback on that one. What do you reckon? A 4-year term? Too long? Not long enough? Let us know your thoughts. And lower thresholds for smaller parties. You can text us on 2101 or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. And 16-year-olds reckon it's time for them to get the vote. Let's get to some of your feedback on Michael Wood, former Transport Minister. You've got a few things to say on that. C. Smith's got in touch. What a petty affair. Michael Wood, so many more urgent issues to fix. His faux pas is the least of New Zealand's problems. And this listener says, could you please list all the MPs that have breached the rules? I've lost count. Just doing a quick, hunt in the brain archive. Stuart Nash, Jan Tinetti, Kiritapu Allen, Meka Whaitiri. I was just going through the Labour ones. You may have some others to add to that, 2101 on text. And it isn't just a perceived conflict of interest, another listener says. It is a conflict of interest. 2101 on text or tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. We're keen to hear your thoughts. 29 minutes away from 6. Kia mau tōne mai. Do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. It is time for the business news. Ko taku hoa e nai ko Nona Peltier. She joins me in the studio. Nona, let's talk about more competition on key North American air routes. What is the latest and what's it going to do for prices?
What is it going to do for prices? Well, I don't know the answer to that yet, but I can tell you Air New Zealand are going to increase its focus on its existing North American routes. So it's not planning an expansion. It's planning more trips to the same places it's already traveling to. Of course, that includes Vancouver, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Houston, Chicago, and New York. But Qantas is also looking to expand into North America. But in that case, they were flying to Los Angeles. They're going to be flying to New York from next week. So that's more competition for Air New Zealand. Also, San Francisco, they started flying to last week. They have already been flying to Dallas, and they're looking at a new route at some point, either choosing between Seattle or Chicago, where Air New Zealand is currently flying. But I have to say, none of them are flying to Winnipeg, where I would like them to go.
A personal plea there from Nona Peltier.
Thank you very much.
Okay, wages continuing to increase, but not necessarily in line with inflation. I mean, what should workers expect? Should they be expecting a 7% pay rise or thereabout?
They won't get one, not from these guys anyway. Apparently, a survey by Hayes Recruitment found that 95% of the 1,900 local organizations it surveyed found that they were expecting to give wage increases less than 6%. So the first quarter inflation, 6.7, it's not going to get there. In fact, it's going to be below 6. That was the upper end. No one's going to get before, of these 1,900, 95% of them, that's pretty much all of them, aren't planning to be more generous than that. But Hayes is saying that there could be other things to sweeten the pot. For example, bonuses, other kinds of things that would perhaps lure employees or keep them there, benefits and that kind of thing. So watch that space, but I don't think it's going to be in your pay packet if you're looking for a big raise.
Let's take a twirl around the markets, please, Nona.
Well, we've had a lot of stuff that happened today in the markets, which did seem to really influence it. There's a company called eBOS. They are big they sell healthcare products, pet food products. Some people might know their brand, Red Seal, for example. Well, they've been selling to the Chemist Warehouse for some time, but that supply contract will not be renewed, and it's going to cost the company about $2 billion in sales. So that was a big blow to the company, and their share price fell 10%. That's a really big company on the market, so that would have been an impact as well. NZ Kiwi King Salmon. They're a company that has been trying to get open cooler water farming in the Cook Strait. So they have absolutely finally overcome some of the objections. That saw their share price rise up 10% today. Synlait and A2 Milk got a big boost by getting approval from a Chinese regulator to accept their infant formula. Synlait was not manufacturing it because they couldn't get access to the market. That's now happened. So both those companies saw a big increase. A2 Milk up 5%, Synlait up 17%. Pacific Edge. Now, you might not know this company, but
you're taking some liberties today, aren't you, Nona? You're going for it with all the companies.
They have a cancer diagnostic product. But look, the United States Medicare provider has decided it's not going to cover it in the future. Big blow for the company. They're in a trading halt. So overall, how did that work out? Well, our index fell 17 points to 11,864. When you consider all that news, it's quite a bit. The New Zealand dollar is steady at 60.9 US cents. It's down slightly against the Australian dollar, and that's because the Reserve Bank of Australia has lifted its interest rates for the 12th time this year, just a quarter of a percentage point to 4.1%. That means that the Kiwi was down at 91.2 Australian, steady against the British pence at 48.9. There you go. That was a pretty comprehensive report, wasn't it?
It was indeed, and you'll be interested to know that while we've been talking, we've had someone text in with support for you. They'd like an Auckland to Winnipeg direct flight too.
Oh, thank you,
Please, I think it's
please.
From Waiheke, is that your auntie or something?
My auntie. No,
hey,
actually.
and before you go, squeaking shoes today, Nona. Have you got some new boots?
No, I don't, but I've counted them now at last.
Oh, very good. We should run a sweepstake on that one. How many boots does Nona have? 2101 on text.
These are Doc Martin boots only.
Yeah, we'll let you know if you're right. Thank you, Nona. Ka kite. Has it started or not? Tonight, claims and counterclaims about the much-anticipated counter-offensive in Ukraine. The Russians claim to have repelled attacks on two fronts by the Ukraine military. Meanwhile, Kiev's refusing to say whether the fight back has begun. Phil Vine from World Watch reports.
An element of farce surrounds this highly charged moment in time. Ukraine, the great communicator, remaining silent. Russia with loud proclamations of victory.
Moscow says its forces again inflicted huge losses in personnel and equipment, including the destruction of 8 Western-supplied Leopard tanks.
An unverified claim with high propaganda value. From Kiev, a veil of silence, nothing to confirm or deny the long-awaited offensive. The Ukraine military releasing social media images of frontline soldiers with fingers to their lips. The only hint from Ukraine, Deputy Defence Minister Hanna Maliar posting online about an advance around Bakhmut. President Zelensky in his nightly address praising actions of soldiers in that battle-ravaged city.
Бахмутський напрямок. Молодці воїни.
In the direction of Bakhmut. Well done, soldiers. We can see how hysterically Russia greets every step we make there, every position we take. The enemy knows that Ukraine will win. They can see it. They feel it thanks to your strikes, soldiers, and in particular in the Donetsk region.
But about the wider plan, nothing. His former trade minister, Timofey Milovanov, completely unable to confirm whether this is it.
Well, it's really difficult, even for me, to make out what exactly is happening. And I have been talking to people who are directly in the midst, but something is going on.
No doubt. The Russians claimed last night they thwarted another offensive in South Donetsk. Releasing a video, the location's been verified, but not the timing.
The enemy launched an unsuccessful attempt at a large-scale offensive in the South Donetsk axis, the spokesman for Russia's defense ministry said. But is this already Ukraine's much-anticipated large-scale counteroffensive?
That's the question being asked by the news networks and military analysts alike. Brad Bowman, Senior Director at the Foundation for Defence of Democracies, says the way Ukraine is moving its forces hints at a coordinated attack.
Are these just infantry units moving by themselves and kind of doing, or are they working in a combined arms sort of way? By that I mean combining tanks, infantry fighting vehicles, artillery, drones, and infantry, and we are seeing some of that.
What if that's true and Russia has won some early victories, as they claim? As the BBC's James Bowen says, history tends to favour the defenders over the attackers, but overall success will be judged over months, not days or weeks.
What is absolutely clear, it will not be over in a week or two. It's going to go on maybe through to when the mud comes back in October.
What's not entirely clear is whether this counter-offensive is officially underway and how much that actually matters to civilians on the ground. Tonight, air raid sirens are activating all over Ukraine as Russian missile and drone strikes maintain a deadly schedule of their own.
It is 20 minutes to 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Do keep your feedback coming, homai or whakaaro, on anything you've heard on the programme this evening. If it's about Michael Wood losing the transport portfolio, what do you reckon of the changes to vapes? And the suggestions we go to 4-year parliamentary term and let 16-year-olds vote. 2101 on text, lots to talk about tonight, or you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. The email address, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Evie's standing by. Anaya Evie, mena pita pita kōrero.
A man has been charged with manslaughter, burglary and aggravated assault after the death of Northland woman Linda Woods in her Kaikohe home last week. The 52-year-old man was taken into custody today after officers searched a nearby property. He's due in the Kaikohe District Court tomorrow. Health Minister Aisha Verrall says new rules stopping new vape outlets from opening near schools won't affect the 3,000 or so shops already in place. The government's today announced new measures to try and stop young people from using e-cigarettes, including a crackdown on disposable vapes and changes to the way vape flavours are described. Dr Verrall says the government needs to balance preventing young people from starting to vape and keeping vapes available for adults who want to give up smoking. Most of the changes come into force from April. The Prime Minister hasn't ruled out letting Michael Wood return to his transport portfolio. Chris Hipkins today stood Mr Wood down after he failed to declare he has shares in Auckland Airport. The Cabinet Office had told Mr Wood about a dozen times to get rid of them. Mr Wood says he accepts the punishment and will sell the shares and work to correct the record. 5 people have been arrested and 6 vehicles impounded after a police crackdown on illegal dirt bikers in South Auckland over the long weekend. Police say about 50 bikes gathered at the Manukau Memorial Gardens before heading to Otara in convoy, darting in and out of traffic and pulling wheelies. Among the arrests was a Killer Bees gang member, with other gang affiliates also tied up in the action. And Russian forces have reportedly destroyed Ukraine's Nova Kakhovka dam. President Zelensky says the action shows why Moscow's forces must be repelled from Ukraine. Ukraine's National Police Force is asking people in affected villages to evacuate. Those are the headlines. Looking at traffic, a PSA for Wellingtonians. Be aware on State Highway 1 tonight there are roadworks closing lanes on Ngaudanga Gorge and Vivian Street tonight. Our next news and weather is at 6 o'clock.
Ngā mihi, Evie. One of the major supermarket chains is promising a permanent cut-price fruit and veg deal. It comes the same day as Consumer New Zealand's criticised the big players, so-called dodgy specials that are allegedly misleading. The watchdog says it's had 160 price complaints from shoppers over the last 2 months. Today, Countdown's committed to 20% off its Odd Bunch range of packaged fruit and veg. Well, joining us now is Countdown's Commercial Director for Fresh, Peter DeVette. Kia ora, Peter. It's a bit more complicated than a straight 20%, so T's and C's apply. Can you explain the deal, please, and the comparison?
Lisa, good evening. We've tried to make it as simple as we possibly can. I think the easiest way to explain it is if we sell a 1.5 kilogram bag of carrots as an example, the Odd Bunch odd bunch equivalent of 1.5 kilogram carrots will be 20% cheaper at least than the normal bag.
And what are you counting as a normal bag? What's the comparison?
Our standard bag. So in the case of a carrot, the normal countdown carrot bag, and then you've got to count the odd bunch carrot bag that you can compare to it.
Okay, so the thing is you can still raise the price of your odd bunch, can't you? You can progressively keep it going up just as long as the other products are going up in price too. You're only committing to keep the gap between the two at 20%, is that right? 20% cheaper.
We are committing to keeping the gap 20% cheaper, Lisa, but I think it's important to say that we compare our pricing every single week of the year. In the current environment, in fact, in any environment, I don't think one can afford not to be competitive on all of your prices. So we stay very close to where the market prices are at, and our conventional products would be very competitive in that space, and we'll keep that 20% difference. And I think important to note that we've always had odd bunch at a saving to consumers versus the standard product. But what we've tried to do is just really standardize it to make it easy to understand what you can expect as a standard saving.
Can you give me an example, Peter? At the moment, can you tell me what the price or difference is between one of your odd bunches and the so-called standard? How much cheaper is the odd bunch at the moment?
Well, it would have varied historically, Lisa. It could have varied anywhere between 10 and 30% or so, and we've now standardized it to 20 as the minimum. It could be more, depending on what's happened, in a specific product range from a seasonality perspective. Produce is a category that it doesn't come out of a factory, obviously, and where odd bunch comes from is the fact that you're dealing with natural product, and often, depending on the season and things like rain and the cyclones we've recently had, you're dealing with either more or less products that's out of standard specification, and based on that, we'll determine the pricing.
Okay, yeah, so explain that in a bit more detail, Peter, for people who don't understand. The odd bunch, well, they're kind of slightly weird-looking fruit and veg, aren't they? Or they might be giant or little. Some of the carrots look like they're hugging each other.
Yeah, they are odd. They're normally either a different shape or they could have some markings on them, depending on the type of product. But we want to make sure that, it depends really on if it's a hard vegetable, as an example. Could just be a shape variance. It could be something that's got a marking on based on weather conditions outside. But what we want to make sure is that the eating quality and the internal quality of the product is as good as the standard product. And often, more often than not, these products would come out of the same field. It's just a variance in the physical appearance of the product.
And there's no end date on this offer, Peter? You're going to make them 20% cheaper forever?
No end date at all. That will be our standard policy going forward. And I think it's also important to just mention, Lisa, our growers, which we've got over 100 of them that we work very closely with, it's not only a great outcome for the consumer, it's also a great outcome for our growers, because any crop, any natural product that you deal with, there will be a part of the crop that's not absolutely perfect. And what it does is it gives them the opportunity to have a market for those products, to get a return on it, and it really helps contribute to bringing food waste down across the value chain.
But they were still selling that product to you regardless, weren't they? So I'm just wondering, who's carrying the cost for this discount? Are the growers still getting the same price? Are you carrying the cost of this guaranteed 20% discount, or are you taking it off the producers?
The 20% discount is on us, Lisa. That's for us to manage our pricing accordingly and to make sure the consumer gets that as a standard. And at the same time, it's on us to make sure that our producers, as I say, we've got over 100 of them dealing directly with us, that it makes commercial sense for them at a total crop level. We've got to make, many of these producers have been with us for 20 years plus. They wouldn't if they don't get a fair return from us, and really a part of our job is to make sure that they get a fair return for everything they supply to us.
So will Countdown still make a profit on the Odd Bunch products?
I think it's fair to say we'll make a profit on our overall produce business, depending on the crop. It could be that in some instances we don't make a profit or a standard profit on an Odd Bunch product, depending on how much volume we're trying to get through the system, depending on the size of the crop that's impacted. Or
so
that qualifies as odd bunch.
Just to give consumers some kind of guarantee or assurance here, are you going to bump up other prices to cover the cost of the 20% discount in essence on the odd bunch?
Absolutely not, Lisa. That I can say with absolute confidence. We've got to be competitive on every single fresh produce product that we sell, or consumers won't come to us. So that's absolutely not the case. What it does do is it enables us to help buy bigger parts of a crop from a producer, where that crop would potentially have gone to other markets. And hopefully, in this instance, the producer and the customer gets a better deal.
Thanks for joining us, Peter. Peter DeVet there from Countdown. Let us know your thoughts on that one, 2101 on text or tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. 5 people have been arrested and 6 vehicles impounded after a police crackdown on illegal dirt bikers in South Auckland over the long weekend. About 50 bikes gathered at the Manukau Memorial Gardens before heading to Otara in convoy, darting in and out of traffic and pulling dangerous wheelies as they rode. Among the arrests was a Killer Bees gang member, with other gang affiliates also tied up in the action. On the streets of Otara, residents and shopkeepers say the disruption from the dangerous bikers is becoming part of daily life. Reporter Tom Taylor and cameraman Nick Monroe have this story.
The revs are so loud in Otara that retailers along the main road can't hear themselves think. Vape store workers Chris Emanuel in Adeline, Tasmania, say noise from the swarms of dirt bikes hooning along East Tamaki Road reverberates around their concrete walled shop.
It gets to the point where we're literally this far apart from each other and we can't hear anything.
A police crackdown dubbed Operation Metallic Red targeted the bikers over the King's birthday weekend, with officers chasing them all over Ngati Otara Park. Police say more arrests are likely in the coming days. Chris welcomes the crackdown, and not just because of the racket.
We don't want to be sitting here minding our own business, doing our jobs, and then to see someone, and I don't want to, get too grim about it, but have someone crack their skull because they're not wearing a helmet.
Chris says the bikers sometimes surround his car as he drives home from work, often pulling wheelies or standing on their seats. He's not so much scared for himself, but for what could happen to the mostly young bikers.
They're kind of weaving in and out of traffic, or they don't really have much mindfulness to the distance between themselves and the other vehicles around them. So I don't usually get caught up, but when I do, it's just like, oh God, it's trying to drive through a minefield.
Adeline's lived in Otara her whole life and says biking's a big part of the lifestyle, but she says it becomes a problem when it affects other people.
I don't think there's really any self-awareness from them, or I don't know, maybe they just actually don't care that they might be disrupting people's peace.
She says kids as young as 14 get into dirt biking, influenced by social media posts of riders showing off their tricks on busy roads and even motorways.
They got bikes, and then I guess they have flash things, and people see that and it looks cool.
Some of the Otara residents we spoke to have had enough.
It's annoying.
What kind of things are you seeing?
I don't really see much. They just go all over the roads, but it's nighttime when it's annoying because you just hear it and it's late.
Well, they can get hurt. People can get hurt. Elderly people as well going past on wheelchairs and mobility and stuff.
Oh, it's just scared that I might hit them. That's the main thing.
Youth worker Imani Suesi looks out for many of the kids involved in dirt biking. He works at the Otara Chill Zone, a place young people can go to hang out after school when their home environments are unstable.
Sometimes we have a pizza day and then they come through and have a feed, or we play games here, or go up to the park and we play basketball, and just that genuine approach with them, just to help them out where we can.
Imani says this approach helps to build trust with the kids. It can be a slow process before they start opening up about their home lives.
A lot of these kids are, probably affiliated, their parents are affiliated, or, just low-income families around here. So, they're just looking for opportunities to grow.
He says kids sometimes see these opportunities in dangerous activities like dirt biking, taking their lead from older siblings or relatives. But he says while gangs are often mixed in with the riding, it's an activity that can be done well in the right environment.
There's a lot of talent out there. Obviously, there's a lot of talent, but I think there should be a safer space for them, just for these kids to express themselves, not on the road.
He says there are driver licensing courses in Otara that can keep kids doing what they love while working towards a motorbike licence that benefits them without putting other road users at risk.
It is 7 minutes away from 6. Kia amo tonu mai. Do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Time for some of your feedback now. Lots of it coming in on the electoral system. This listener says yes to a 4-year term. On the other hand, this person says 4 years is too long when your team is in and about right for my team. On the threshold, 5% threshold is realistic, this listener says, to make sure we don't have any more crazy loopy ideas being promoted. It's a serious business running a country, they reckon. No to 16-year-olds voting, this listener says. Kids have no idea and they don't contribute to the economy. They do if they have a job, don't they? They pay tax. And this person says on vaping regulations, they need to be enforced much more strictly. I'm a year 12, 17-year-old student, and 1 out of 5 students my age vape, and it's pretty similar for lower years, all the way down to year 9. So 13-year-olds are vaping in the toilets, that listener reckons. Thank you for getting in touch. And on Nona's boots, this person says they estimate 27 pairs of boots. You underestimate, Nona. Back to the drawing board. It is not 27. You need to be going in an upward direction. That's a clue. 2101 on text. 39 New Zealand athletes will tomorrow board a plane for Berlin to compete in the Special Olympics. For many of the competitors who have intellectual disabilities, the event is the first time away from their families as they chase coveted gold medals and life experiences. Jimmy Allingham caught up with 3 Manawatu-based athletes before they head off.
Special Olympian Jesse Williams looks fit and lithe as we sit beside a Palmerston North swimming pool before a training session.
What are you competing in?
50.
What distance?
50 and 25.
So what sort of times do you aim for that?
16 seconds, 4 is 25 and 37 for his 50.
That's Mr Williams' coach, Carla Lewilier, who puts him through his paces twice a week. In swimming terms, the 37-year-old, who has Down syndrome, is a veteran.
I've swimming for 23 years now.
And so why do you keep doing it? That's a long time.
It is good exercise. I get fit.
He's definitely that, and Ms Lewilier, who will travel to Germany as the New Zealand team's swimming coach, rates his chances.
He's one of our fastest guys, so we've just got to keep him on track. He races really well though. Doesn't train very fast, but he races really, really well, which is one of the good things about him. And he likes that thought of a medal, so he goes hard.
Jesse, are you after gold?
Yes.
To help him achieve this, Mr Williams is put through short, fast bursts in the water. Previously, he mostly competed in longer distance events. Ms Lewilier says Special Olympics are about more than just sport.
It's how much the athletes grow, because they go away and they've really got no idea what it's going to be like, and suddenly they've got stadium with 7,000 other people. It's really cool. It's like the full-on Olympics. You come in and you're waving and everyone's cheering for New Zealand.
10-pin bowler Josh Ryan has experienced that before. These are the 41-year-old's 4th games.
It's the World Summer Games.
And you're part of the New Zealand team?
Yep. In bowling we have 4 people.
And is it an individual competition or a team one?
Team.
So how good are you at bowling?
Really good.
3-a-side basketballer Hayden Wilson is a man of few words off the court, helped out here by mum Sharon Smith.
And what's the difference between that and the basketball we see here?
5 people.
5 people.
So it's fewer people?
Yeah.
And what's the size of the court?
Half
court.
Yeah.
How long have you played?
12 years.
And what do you like about it?
Fun. It's fun.
On the court, the 26-year-old shows off skills honed on the driveway at home, where he practices dribbling. Each athlete has had to raise thousands to get to Berlin, and Mr Wilson has spent hours manning sausage sizzles between training to get him there. Stepfather Ron Smith says the experience has helped Mr Wilson come out of his shell.
It's had a big impact on his lifestyle. It's given him confidence and the ability, because of his autism, it's encouraging him to talk to strangers. I also believe that when he goes to Berlin, when he comes back, he's going to be a really changed person.
The Special Olympics opening ceremony, to be televised globally, is on Sunday, June the 19th, New Zealand time.
Right, some more of your feedback, lots of it on potential changes to the electoral system. A bunch of it seems to be in favour of giving 16-year-olds the vote. Kate says, yes to 4-year term, yes to lower age, yes to lower threshold. Power to the people. We can make democracy work, says Kate. Another person says electoral changes are awesome, especially donation changes and a lower threshold. Another person says 16, voting age, yep, lower threshold, no. 4-year term, yep. Another says definitely lower the threshold to 3.5%. We need all votes to count. 16-year-olds, yeah, why not? I'm assuming the educated will vote, that person says. On vapes, a listener has said, driving home on Richmond Road, now this is in Auckland, 3 vape stores within 50 metres from Richmond Road Primary and St Paul's College. They need to go, dispensary only access. Another says the government is prioritising the health of those that chose to start smoking over the health of our tamariki by implementing changes that don't even protect kids who are already hooked. Vapes should only be available through pharmacies, another listener says, so that they can be used to stop smoking. No one else needs to have them. Boy, you've got a lot to say on the Odd Bunch. Let's whip through a few. Odd Bunch is a brilliant range of fruit and veg, often not very odd at all, says Francis. Great value. But another person says, sounds like the Odd Bunch is seconds. Usually seconds are sold for at least 50% cheaper. 20% discount for seconds is more robbery.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Ngā mihi o te pō. Good evening. Ko Ivy Ashton tēnei. Police have arrested and charged a man in connection with the death of Linda Woods in her Kaikohe home last week. The 52-year-old has been taken into custody after officers searched a nearby property earlier today. The police have charged the man with manslaughter, burglary and aggravated assault, and he'll appear in Kaikohe District Court tomorrow. Linda Woods, 71, died on Thursday night after being injured during a struggle when a person broke into her Taraide Street property. A friend of Linda Woods says that she was well known and well loved in Kaikohe. Betty Wihongi says Mrs Woods had lovely āhua.
She was an absolutely beautiful lady. She was one of the stalwarts for her commitment to kohanga reo with her children. When it first started off in Kaikohe, she was also voted the best customer service lady in Kaikohe community.
Stood-down Transport Minister Michael Wood says he's disappointed to lose the portfolio he loves, but accepts the decision to stand him down. Mr Wood failed to immediately declare he had $13,000 worth of shares in Auckland Airport, and despite intending to get rid of them, hadn't got around to it. He says he'll sell his shares immediately and worked to correct the register. He offered the Prime Minister no excuse for the error.
I started a process of selling the shares last year. Basically came across a hitch, which is that I needed information back from the share register. That didn't arrive, I think because they had an old email address. And in the reality of the fairly busy life that I have, I didn't get back to it. Now that's not an excuse, that's the honest answer and the honest reason.
The Cabinet Office reminded Michael Wood about the need to get rid of his shares in Auckland Airport around half a dozen times. The Prime Minister has indicated Mr Wood could return to the transport role once the shares are sold. The Health Minister says rules stopping new vape outlets from opening near schools won't affect shops already in place. New measures to try to stop young people from using e-cigarettes were announced by the government today. They include a crackdown on disposable vapes and changes to the language allowed to describe vape flavours. Aisha Verrill says locations within 300 metres of schools and marae will also be off limits for vape shops.
Those shops were set up under the law as it was at the time, and we feel it's legitimate that they continue.
Most of the changes come into force from April, while retailers of disposable and reusable vapes have been given a grace period of up to 6 months. The government says it's still trying to work with farmers on how to tax agricultural greenhouse gases. The Prime Minister says officials are pressing on with He Waka Eke Noa, the primary sector climate action partnership. Chris Hipkins didn't answer directly when asked whether he'd have farmers on side by October's election.
We continue to have good, robust conversations about that. It's always been a very challenging area. Anyone who reads the news coverage of it will know that this is not an uncontroversial area. The position of the government continues to be that we want to work with the sector to find a solution.
Chris Hipkins says the government isn't proposing to change the backstop of forcing agriculture into the emissions trading scheme in 2025. He says there's plenty of time to continue discussions after the election. The Firefighters Union says there's an obvious conflict of interest in asbestos investigations going on at Auckland's main fire station. The country's busiest station has been partly shut for weeks. The mishandling of the station's asbestos management plan has forced Fire and Emergency into a nationwide review of all its plans. The Professional Firefighters Union is now refusing to participate in FENZ's investigation at Auckland. It says it's preposterous for FENZ to be relying on a group manager, a property manager and a wellbeing team member to carry out an impartial inquiry. The unions and FENZ have both brought in independent testers and asbestos surveyors. A Russian-occupied dam on the Dnipro River in southern Ukraine has been at least partially destroyed, posing a risk of serious flooding to the Ukrainian-held city of Kherson downstream. Those living near the dam are already being evacuated. The dam reservoir supplies water to the Crimean Peninsula and to a nuclear power plant, both also Russian-occupied. The local Moscow-installed mayor has blamed terrorism for the incident, while the Ukrainian military are blaming the Russian invaders. Meanwhile, Russia has claimed for a second night to have thwarted a major Ukrainian offensive. The BBC's Alsha Orkney reports.
Russia's statement comes after another day of conflicting reports from the invaders and the defenders. Moscow says its forces again inflicted huge losses in personnel and equipment, including the destruction of 8 Western-supplied Leopard tanks. Ukraine didn't comment on this, but said its air defence was repelling Russian attacks around Kyiv. It says that in Kharkiv in the northeast, Russian forces fired missiles at 2 districts, but didn't mention casualties. Earlier, President Zelensky praised the performance of Ukrainian soldiers in the embattled city of Bakhmut in Donetsk, but he didn't elaborate.
And 5 people have been arrested after tearing through Auckland on dirt bikes. Up to 50 dirt bike riders were gathered at the Manukau Memorial Gardens on Sunday doing burnouts. 2 riders crashed while they were fleeing from police and were taken to hospital with moderate injuries. The Eagle helicopter pursued another rider who was found to be a member of the Killer Bees gang. 2 other riders were arrested, one of whom was involved in a previous dirt bike run connected to the King Cobras gang. That's the news.
Pacific Waves.
Bringing Kiribati back into the forum.
Diving into the big stories of the region.
They are an instrument of the Constitution of Fiji.
And shining a light on issues affecting Pacific peoples in Aotearoa and around the world.
Being able to go out into different places and areas that share special connections with our community was really special.
We tala noa to Pacific leaders, newsmakers, experts and commentators, and bring you up-to-date coverage from our dedicated RNZ Pacific team and talented correspondents on the ground in the region. Pacific Waves at 8:15 weeknights on RNZ National.
You're back with Lisa Owen on Checkpoint next. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Wednesday. Northland, Auckland and Coromandel. Rain clearing this evening. Fine tomorrow, apart from a few showers about Northland and Coromandel. For Bay of Plenty, increasing fine spells. Waikato to the Kapiti coast, including the central high country. Partly cloudy today, mainly fine tomorrow, apart from cloudy periods south of Taranaki. Gisborne to Wairarapa, Wellington and coastal Marlborough and North Canterbury. Often cloudy with showers. Fine breaks developing in Wellington tomorrow afternoon. For the remainder of Te Waiponamu, the South Island, mainly fine with morning frosts. A few areas of morning fog or low cloud. And for Kaikohe, Chatham Islands, mostly cloudy, isolated showers. It's 7 minutes past 6. I'll have news headlines for you at about 6:30.
Kia ora rā e ho, no mai hoki mai, this is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. A former New Zealand soldier who gave key evidence in a trial centred around a now disgraced former Australian SAS soldier has been deemed an unreliable and dishonest witness by the trial judge. Ben Robert Smith, who won the Victoria Cross for his actions in Afghanistan, had sued Australian newspapers who'd accused him of war crimes, including the murder of prisoners. But the court dismissed the defamation action against the newspapers and journalists, finding the allegations to be substantially true. The evidence of person 35, who was in the New Zealand SAS before serving for Australia, was discredited in the detailed judgment. Well, joining us now is one of the investigative journalists who revealed Robert Smith's war crimes and who was subject to the defamation action, Nick McKenzie from the Melbourne Age. Hi, Nick.
Good afternoon.
Nick, can you just paint a picture for us? How was this person 35 and Ben Robert Smith connected? What was the relevance of that witness?
They served together in Afghanistan. Person 35 joined the Australian SASR from New Zealand. He's back in New Zealand now, so he flew from New Zealand to Australia to testify. He was one of Robert Smith's best mates and closest supporters, and he played an absolutely critical role in the trial. A central allegation involved 2 prisoners taken out of a tunnel at a compound called Compound Whiskey 108, Easter Sunday 2009. It was person 35 who detained the 2 men in the tunnel, the 2 prisoners. He took them out and they were executed by Robert Smith's patrol. Robert Smith killed one, another soldier killed the other, murdered them in cold blood. These are prisoners under confinement. Now, person 35 went to court and said, the tunnel was empty. There were no prisoners taken. They never existed. And that's been exposed by the judge as an absolute lie. And more than that, the judge has found person 35 effectively colluded and covered up war crimes to protect his friend.
So in essence, he was a corroborating witness for Ben Robert Smith, backing up his story.
Absolutely right, corroborating a lie, effectively, or attempting to. He was also a very colourful witness. His testimony was extraordinary. I mean, some of the more colourful aspects of it, pale into insignificance when compared to the Hartley allegation that Afghan prisoners were murdered, which is now found by a judge to have been true. But the colourful sort of sideshow really gave an insight into the character of this New Zealander. Now, we expect our special forces to be men of integrity, and this man was anything but. For instance, photos were revealed showing that he dressed up at a fancy dress party in Afghanistan as a member of the KKK, the infamous white supremacist group. Hardly an appropriate thing to do if you're in a mostly Muslim country. This is a man who, even on the eve of his testimony, was posting on Instagram posts that were deriding civilians executed as no big loss. He was mocking our counsel, our barristers, as, well, I won't even use the language he used. Now, of course, this Instagram posting was all put to him in the court. We can Google, we found it. And it made him out not only to be a liar and somebody who was prepared to lie about murders, but someone who had absolute disregard for the court process. And frankly, someone who was incredibly stupid. And it was these lies, not just Robert Smith's lies, but the lies of his small band of mates, which really brought him undone. And the judge has been absolutely scathing about the conduct of person 35.
Nick, tell us a bit more about the collusion. So these men served together and he was in essence corroborating this lie, as you have pointed out. But what dealings did they have with each other in the lead up to the trial and giving evidence, and also the funding of the men's legal team as well?
It was really quite extraordinary, the level of collusion that Ben Robert Smith, person 35, and their little band of cronies got up to. And it really must be said at the outset, these lies were exposed not because of journalists. Yes, we played our part, but ultimately the good men of the SAS in Australia, and they are the vast majority, they stood up and told the truth in court. It was just this little band of Ben Robert Smith brothers that lied. The vast majority came to court and told the truth. And these are SAS men who witnessed the prisoners being taken out of the tunnel, witnessed the executions happening before their very eyes. They told the truth in absolutely visceral detail and were believed by the judge because they spoke honestly and because there was a vast amount of corroborating evidence. The lies that were put, they were put because they were woven in the lead up to the trial. So Ben Robert Smith flew to New Zealand and pretended it was a bit of a family holiday, no big deal, absolute garbage, and the judge saw through that. He was colluding with person 35 along with 2 other core witnesses. In fact, he flew to New Zealand, America. He was flying all over the world, meeting witnesses face to face, so he couldn't be tapped by the police to concoct these lies. The other aspect of collusion or sort of witnesses grouping together to defeat the truth involved Ben Roberts-Smith paying the legal fees for 35 and for other small number of other witnesses. These were men who were entitled to go to the Defence Force of Australia and get free independent legal advice, which is what most of the SAS soldiers in the case did. They had independent barristers paid for by the Defence Department. The Roberts-Smith arranged on the side commercial lawyers paid for by him, much more expensive, to represent these guys, creating a bond of obligation. I'm going to look after you, I'll pay your legal fees. Person 35's legal fees, not just the fees for the defamation case, but his legal fees for the major war crimes inquiry run by His Honour Justice Brereton in Australia. So paying their legal fees, meeting with them, colluding over the phone, using secret encrypted messenger apps. This was all exposed and laid bare by the judge, and the judge says this is absolute collusion. The evidence is not independent. In fact, more than that, it's a pack of lies.
Nick, we're almost out of time, but I'm curious, in general terms, what is person 35 doing, and have you spoken to them?
I've not spoken to person 35. I know what they're doing. I can't give too much detail away because I need to respect the court orders around their identity.
Can you tell us whether they're still in the forces? Are you allowed to say?
Listen, I understand they were a reservist. I don't think that's the case anymore, given the circumstances. But they're still very much an active member of the Defence Force community in New Zealand and Australia, and unfortunately still stoking the flames of disinformation, still pretending that war crimes aren't a big deal, and a small rump of people who continue to disgrace the Australian military, in stark contrast to the many more good men of the SAS who've actually stood up for what's lawful and appropriate.
Really appreciate your time this evening. That is Nick McKenzie from the Melbourne Age, one of the journalists who uncovered the story about Ben Roberts-Smith and has been vindicated with the judge's ruling, saying that, well, he did commit war crimes, including murder. The allegations, according to the judge, substantially true. Staying in Australia, convicted child killer Kathleen Folbigg has celebrated her first night of freedom after 2 decades in prison. Ms. Folbigg was found guilty in 2003 of killing her 4 children, but was released from prison yesterday after she was granted an unconditional pardon based on new evidence. In her first statement since being released today, she said she's extremely humbled and grateful for being pardoned. Kathleen Folbigg called her release a major victory for science and truth. The lawyer says it's too early to consider the next steps, but will likely seek compensation and to have the convictions quashed. The ABC's Rachel Mealy reports.
Tracy Chapman has stood by her friend Kathleen Folbigg's side through it all.
For the first time, I'm kind of lost for words. It's been like 20 years and it's been a very hard, long slog, and it's quite surreal this morning. So forgive me, I'm usually full of things to say.
The New South Wales Attorney-General yesterday announced an unconditional pardon for Kathleen Folbigg after an inquiry into her convictions. She was immediately freed from jail after serving 20 years of her sentence. Speaking in Coffs Harbour, Tracy Chapman says the pair spent time together on her farm in northern New South Wales.
We just kind of enjoyed each other's company. She spent a lot of time with my dogs and getting to know my animals, and we didn't get our steak for dinner, which was a bugger. So we've had pizza last night. We've had a bit of a flashback to 20 years. She asked for a Kahlua and Coke, so she had her first alcoholic beverage with a flashback for the last 20 years of a Kahlua and Coke.
She says Kathleen Folbigg struggled when she tried to use a smartphone and is getting her head around new technology.
Even the television. She was going, oh my God, look at the television. It's got so many capabilities. So she was able to just go, oh my God, I can watch what's iView? And we were explaining we could actually watch all these television shows and you don't have to sit there at 7:30 and watch the show anymore. She was just like, this is amazing.
Kathleen Folbigg was convicted in 2003 of killing her 4 infant children. It was a circumstantial case, with the prosecution alleging she'd smothered the infants, who were aged from 19 days to 19 months old. Lawyer Rani Rego has waged a 10-year campaign for Kathleen Folbigg's freedom.
The state has done the unimaginable to Kathleen Folbigg. They have put her in prison when she lost her 4 children. This is a tragic story, but Kathleen is an example of a broader problem in the system. And if Australia really wants to make some good from a tragic story, they will seriously consider reviewing their system of post-conviction review. The same system that took too long to get to today.
She says Kathleen Folbigg's entire legal team will get together to figure out the next steps, including the question of compensation. But she says they'll have to wait for the full report of the Special Commission of Inquiry.
We've likened the case to Lindy Chamberlain because of the like nature of the case. As obviously a mother wrongly accused of killing her child. But we've also got to look at the scale we're dealing with Kathleen. She not only lost 1 child, she's lost 4. She's been in jail for 20 years. The system has failed her at every step. Instead of trying to understand why her children died, potentially through an inquest, which was said should have happened all the way back in 2001, we threw her in jail, locked her up, called her Australia's worst female serial killer, put her in solitary. So, I mean, how would any of you feel to have that happen to you?
Kathleen Folbigg's friend Tracy Chapman says the pair is in no hurry to find out what's next.
She actually said to me this morning, my face muscles hurt from smiling so much. So, yeah.
It is 19 minutes after 6 and you're with Checkpoints on RNZ National. In the UK, Prince Harry has been admonished for wasting the court's time when he was absent on the first day of the trial into alleged phone hacking. The court heard that unlawful information gathering acted like a web around the Duke of Sussex. The trial involves Mirror Group, newspapers, which denied the phone hacking allegations. The Prince's lawyers have cited stories about his relationship with Chelsea Davy, which appeared in the newspaper. The BBC's Katie Razzle reports.
Locked in a battle with the tabloid press, Harry versus Mirror Group newspapers, a fight that began many decades ago and has ended up in court. Prince Harry claims he was targeted by the papers even when he was a child and right up to 2011. That journalists and private investigators hacked his phone and the phones of his friends and associates and used other unlawful methods to invade his privacy. His barrister said today the Daily Mirror had also listened in to his mother, Princess Diana's voicemail messages. The information, which he claims could only have been obtained illegally, often ended up on the front pages, and these stories drove sales. A headline in 2001, Rugger Off, about how a back injury was stopping the then 17-year-old prince playing rugby, had all the telltale signs, said his barrister, of being discovered unlawfully. Another from 2002 about drug taking is alleged to have involved payments to private investigators. Many of the 33 articles under scrutiny in the court concern his on-off relationship with Chelsea Davy. The pressure led to Prince Harry suffering bouts of depression. And with the Mirror apparently knowing their every move, you can hardly blame her for ending the relationship, the judge heard today. Prince Harry wasn't at the High Court. He flew into London overnight from Los Angeles. The judge said he was a little surprised at the Prince's absence today, as he'd previously said witnesses should be available the day before they're due to give evidence. MGN's lawyer, Andrew Green KC, didn't mince his words, calling it absolutely extraordinary that he's not available for day one of his own trial. Mr Sherburn for the Prince explained his travel arrangements as such and his security arrangements as such that it is a little bit tricky. The Mirror has admitted in a previous court case that phone hacking did occur at its papers between 1999 and 2006 and has paid out £100 million in damages. But it says there is no evidence in Prince Harry's case. No data showing calls to his phone, no admissions by journalists, no suggestion by the police that he was hacked. His security operation was like very few on earth, said Mr Green, and journalists would have been taking an enormous risk in targeting him. As to the claims MGN hacked Princess Diana, he called it total speculation without any evidential basis whatsoever. Outside this court, they've been preparing for the intense interest tomorrow will bring when the Duke of Sussex steps into the witness box, the first senior royal in more than a century to give evidence in a court. Prince Harry will be cross-examined for the next day and a half by a skilled barrister whose job it is to prove him wrong about where MGN got their stories. It's likely to be highly personal, about information he would rather had never made it into the public domain. It could be bruising and reputationally damaging, but in his efforts to reform the tabloid press, he clearly thinks it's worth the risk.
To the US now, and the race to be the Republican candidate for the next presidential election is heating up, with former US Vice President Mike Pence applying to make his bid for the nomination. Donald Trump's Vice President fell out of favour with Trump supporters when he rejected calls to overturn Joe Biden's victory. The BBC's Washington correspondent Gary O'Donoghue tells us more about his chances.
He's in third place in the polling, if you believe the polls at this stage. Problem is it's a very, very distant third place. So he's looking at 5 or 6% of Republican supporters backing him. That's about 15 points behind the Florida Governor Ron DeSantis and a whopping 45 points behind Donald Trump. But he does have a lot of name recognition. He has the ability to raise some money. He's very popular with evangelical Christians. He's got a lot of experience and, he does have some of that sort of sheen of the Trump years for those who are keen to return to those, perhaps without some of the drama. So to that extent, he may be attractive, but at the moment, it's looking like an uphill struggle. Of course, for the election deniers, and there are a lot of them, he was the man that stood in the way of overturning the election result. He was the man, if you remember, who some of those people on January the 6th were saying that should be hanged. Hang Mike Pence, they chanted as they stormed the Capitol, and Donald Trump attacked him for not doing what he wanted him to do. And so he's had to live with that. But he's also stopped short of really going for Donald Trump in the period since. Like most of the other candidates, he knows that would be bad politics to try and attack someone who's getting 50-odd% of the vote.
It looks a bit like a pair of futuristic ski goggles. But Apple is pinning its hopes on an expensive augmented reality headset. The Apple Vision Pro is the company's first major hardware launch for almost a decade. CEO Tim Cook says the new headset seamlessly blends the real world and the virtual world. Shelley Molasi has the details.
This is a day that's been years in the making.
Apple CEO Tim Cook kicking off the 2023 Worldwide Developers Conference, introducing a mixed reality headset called Apple Vision Pro. Offers both virtual and augmented reality by allowing users to connect apps from Apple and others in a new way.
Blending digital content with the real world can unlock experiences like nothing we've ever seen.
Apple says the headset will go on sale early next year and will cost $3,499. Apple also unveiled new MacBooks, including a 15-inch MacBook Air, and several new features for the iPhone, iPad, and Watch, including improved video conferencing, FaceTime, and messaging features across all products.
Including the ability to simply say Siri to activate Siri.
As well as a revamped lock screen for iPad OS, a new caller ID for iPhone users, and a new feature called Check-in, which notifies selected contacts when a user reaches an intended destination.
Whether you're walking home after dark or going for an early morning run, you can start check-in with a family member or friend to let them know when you get home safely.
If a user doesn't reach a destination, Check-in automatically shares useful information like location, battery, and cell service status with selected users. And as big tech companies race to introduce AI-powered tools, Apple took a more subtle approach to artificial intelligence, announcing an update to autocorrect that's using AI to make it more accurate.
In the US, an inmate is cooking up a storm inside a federal prison in Memphis, Tennessee, and his videos of his cooking lessons over a prison stove are going viral online. So how does he do it? Well, believe it or not, Willie Hampton cooks in rubbish bags using a makeshift stove built from a soda can and powered by burning Vaseline. Jack Bellieur has the story.
Hello, America. Hampton once again.
LOL.
Willie Hampton, inmate 79948-011.
Outside world, I put this on everything. Smoke barbecue sauce. That's all it is.
And Chef. This budding social media star posted his first video back in January, talking about his life before heading to prison to serve a life sentence for drugs.
Vietnam wasn't a choice for me.
But dozens of videos later,
this right here, this right here, this right here.
This 78-year-old has a bona fide cooking show.
And guess what? I was thinking about sharing it with my buddies. Guess what? I had second thoughts.
He gives detailed, step-by-step instructions on how to make everything from beef and broccoli,
I'm gonna throw a little cheese on this too,
to fried rice.
Well, this right here is a pigeon. You see the different? This is a pigeon. This is actually a pigeon.
Using only the tools and ingredients he can get his hands on behind bars.
So you know they stopped selling black pepper and salt at FCI Memphis, so we don't have no salt. I guess they don't want us to die early.
Did he say pigeon? I'm sure he said pigeon. Let's get to some more of your feedback before we head off about the electoral system and whether 16-year-olds should get the vote. Dee's got in touch and says 16-year-olds can barely make a bed and pick up wet towels lining their floors, let alone make any constructive decisions that'll impact the whole country. Harsh, Dee. Someone else has got in touch to say my 16-year-old is more politically aware than most adults in New Zealand and has to live longer with the consequences of decisions made now. She should be allowed to vote. Lots of you getting in touch about the odd bunch and Countdown saying it's going to discount them by 20%. Sarah says, how much less do they pay the farmers for odd bunch? Interesting to hear from growers. Well, they say that they're the ones taking the hit on the price and they're not making the farmers or producers pay up. Someone else says, I bought 2.5 kgs of odd bunch potatoes for $5, the normal price at Countdown for the nod. Odd bunch spuds is $10. That is about all we have time for. Do tune in tomorrow at 5 a.m. for First Up. A school principal tells First Up why the government's moves to curb youth vaping haven't gone far enough. 5 a.m. tomorrow for that conversation. We'll catch you a little later.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Kia ora, I'm Evie Ashton. A 52-year-old man is due in the Kaikohe District Court tomorrow, charged with manslaughter, burglary and aggravated assault after the death of Linda Woods. Ms Woods, 71, died on Thursday night after a struggle when someone broke into her Taraire Street property. Former Transport Minister Michael Wood says he accepts the Prime Minister's decision to stand him down. Mr Wood got into trouble for a perceived conflict of interest after failing to declare Auckland Airport shares he's owned for 30 years, which are worth about $13,000. The government's unveiled new measures to try to stop young people from using e-cigarettes. They include stopping new vape outlets from opening near schools, a crackdown on disposable vapes, and changes to the language allowed to describe vape flavours. Most of the changes come into force from April. A major Soviet-era dam in a Russian-controlled area of southern Ukraine has been breached, unleashing floodwaters across the war zone. Russia and Ukraine are blaming each other. And former US Vice President Mike